Development, Part 2, Stages, from Being True Love. Please subscribe if you're watching. Subscription is free, and you'll be a part of the Being True Love community online at YouTube. So, humans develop in stages, and for this lesson, we're going to be considering Erikson's stages of development. Erikson has several stages of development, and the idea is that with each stage there is some sort of crisis that humans have, and the way in which they are taught to respond or how they are guided through the response to that crisis is how the human personality and character overall kind of develops. So like I mentioned, each stage has a crisis, and Erikson found that humans learn something positive or negative at each stage of development. So it's just like the picture. If you notice the apple, one apple is rotten, one apple is ready to be eaten and nice and fresh. And that's the same way that humans are. Depending on how we develop, we can be decaying or we can be thriving. According to Erikson, stage 1 of human stages of development is infancy. So the crisis during infancy is to either develop trust or mistrust. And so how would an infant develop trust? Well, an infant gets feedback from the world around them. So as an infant cries and the caregivers and adults around them respond to infant cries with, trying to see if they're hungry, trying to see if they need to be changed, all of those kind of things. That's how an infant learns to trust the world. There was a study eons ago where infants were left with very little human contact, and so they didn't have a lot of responses to their cries, and these infants actually developed just kind of mildly, where they didn't even cry anymore. They just didn't, the environment didn't reward them. There was no trust in the environment. There was no trust in the outside world that if they cried out, their needs would be met. So it's actually a very healthy thing when you see kind of like a whining, spoiled child, because to some degree, because it means that they understand that when they cry out, the world responds to them. That's how they get their needs met, when they're crying out. So of course, I'm sure every parent's had the child that has colic, and they just say, we'll just let them cry. And of course, there's a natural blend of healthy parenting to that as well. But overall, at this stage of development in infancy is when the human overall develops either a sense of trust or mistrust in the environment. In stage 2, which is early childhood, the crisis is developing a sense of autonomy, or will the child develop a sense of shame and doubt? So if you look at this GIF emoji that I put over here, this is all fun and game gift emojis of way to learn. But if you look at this one right here, if you can see my cursor on the screen, where the little boy is just, he's trying to pour some milk for himself, and he's not doing a very good job. He like totally misses the cup or whatever. Now this is the stage where the child will learn either a sense of autonomy or a sense of shame in doing things on their own, shame and doubt. So it depends on how the caregivers respond to them when they say, "God darn it, you spilled all this milk on the floor. You are so bad. I can't believe you did this." Or will it be more like, "Oh, you had an accident? So that the reason why you had an accident is because you can't pour your milk on the floor. This is how you do it." And you go, and the caregiver proceeds to explaining to the child, how it's done, and giving them just a chance to make a mistake rather than shaming them. Because when they're shamed, then they'll develop a sense of doubt. So for instance, like if you look in the next picture, with the dad, he's kind of like simulating with the dad and the little boy riding on the skateboard. The father is kind of like simulating that the kid is riding on his own. And this is just, just a fun way to regenerate a sense of autonomy in the kid. Of course, the kid knows that it's not real, probably instinctively, but it's giving the kid a sense like, one day you'll be able to do this too. But right now I'm helping you. When children have that sense of autonomy instilled in them, when their mistakes are known as just mistakes and they're not ridiculed, they develop an attitude that they can do things. If you look in this picture, the little boy saying, I can do it. They feel confident that they'll do their best. And like Master P over here is saying, if I can do it, you can do it. Chase your dreams and your goals. So they develop a sense of, if I can, you can too. And they become persons who encourage others in the world. Sometime, and we'll talk about this later on, sometime when you don't get, or when a child doesn't get what they were meant to get from this stage, they can get it from alternative places, or they can teach this to themselves on their own. Another aftermath of shame and doubt is just this overall attitude that one can't do anything. If every time they try to pour some milk and it spills like it did here, it's always going to be, if the child is always hearing, God, you messed up, or you're so bad, or why are you doing that? You shouldn't be doing that. They'll always have that in the back of their mind, and they'll develop a sense that they just can't do things. They'll fail to thrive. They won't be very creative. This is the best example. This guy over here in the bottom corner, he says, I'm not angry. Everybody makes mistakes. And that's kind of how parenting should go. There's no perfection to that. Of course, everyone makes mistakes. Not everyone is able to be patient all the time. But overall, if you're just practicing, it's okay. You made a mistake. Let me show you how to do it. The more often, the better. In stage 3, this is the play age, and the crisis of the play age is to either develop initiative versus guilt. So if we go back a stage, we'll understand how when a child was able to develop a sense of autonomy, then it makes sense that they can develop a sense of initiative. If they were able to develop trust and autonomy, then it makes sense that they would be able to have a healthier time developing the initiative. And to have the initiative is just this idea that it takes a lot of autonomy, and it's this ideal that I can go out to the world and create something. I can do something. I can start something. I can say something. I can be something. If you look down in the bottom corner, it's just, you see this guy, he's like very timid. It's kind of like, oh, I don't know. Or this woman here says, I tried and I failed. That's the kind of attitude that someone who doesn't have initiative but has more guilt inside would feel. If you look at the girl in the corner, she's like sitting at the bus stop or at some park near the bus stop or something like that. And she's just, oh, I got it. That's the kind of mindset that someone who has the ability to take the initiative will have. This guy, he's like, oh, I got it, I'm good. When you can take the initiative, you're confident in your abilities. You don't need a lot of gratification from others. You are self-motivated, self-reliant. Here's another example GIF emoji that I chose, and this is the one where LeBron, I don't know who that teammate is, but as you can see, he thought he was going to give him a high five, and when he didn't, he just hit his own hand. It's like there's no better way to show that you're self-reliant than to not need anyone else's approval or gratification. Like, oh, you didn't hit my hand? Okay, I'll give my own self a high five. I know I did good. It's that ability to rely back on the self when adversity or when alternate situations happen. So say for instance in this example here, if LeBron had not already developed this sense of initiative in himself, he might take this very personal. Someone who doesn't have the ability to have the initial initiative might take this very personal. Oh, you didn't shake my hand. Oh, he must not like me. They'll probably go home, overthink it 2 times and 5 times over, and like, why didn't he shake my hand? What happened in the game? Did I take the ball? Why did they ignore me that way? Why was he? And it may be none of those things at all. Instead, he just completely brushed it off like, okay, bam, I'll get my own hand. It's all good because I can take the initiative. I know I'm good at what I do. I don't need your approval to say so. Another reflection of someone who's not able to take an initiative is this emoji gif here. It says, I don't know how you expect me to respond. And this is problemsome because people who don't develop a sense of initiative, they don't have a sense of autonomy, and they can't really think for themselves. And they're kind of those people that maybe someone does something or harms you and you say like, why did you do that? And they just kind of look at you in blank, like they can't say anything because they don't even know how to initiate, or they don't have the autonomy to articulate their own beliefs and words. They're kind of just going through life waiting on someone else to say and do things for them because they don't have a good sense of initiative. And on the right, here's another where the girl says, I don't want to regret anything. And that's, again, the unhealthy side of stage 3 crisis, is where someone just fails to thrive because they don't want to regret anything. They don't want to mess up. They don't want to fail. They just feel like, kind of like, if I do something, I'm going to mess something up. I'll just be quiet, do nothing, do as I'm told. And that's not really a healthy, thriving human being. And then the last two here is one person, she's just, the guilt is intensifying in her. It's like just looking sad. And the other one is like, okay, got it, yeah. And it's just like they're confident. They can take the initiative. They're self-reliant. They can go about life in a healthy manner. And again, this is reflective of stage 3 of Erikson's stages of development. Let's go on to stage 4. Stage 4 is the school age, and the crisis of stage 4 is either the child will develop a sense of industry or a sense of inferiority. Now, a sense of industry is kind of basically knowing that you can be involved in life's everyday task. If you look at this emoji here that I'm circling around, the second one, where everyone's just walking like they're in school, or maybe, yeah, it looks like a college campus possibly. This is industry. Industry is being a part of something, being a part of the grand scheme. If you look at these kids down here, they're all involved. They're all able to get on a computer. They're all able to put the headphones on. They're all able to sit there. They're all able to pay attention. In the corner picture here, it's a popular cartoon on PBS, Arthur. He's grabbing his books, he's at school. That's all part of industry. You're able to be a part of the grand scheme of things. Here's another where it's a girl. She's obviously in a class full of guys, and the instructor tells her, hey, you come on up. You show me what you got. That helps a child develop industry. Like, they can participate. They can participate and even mess up when they participate, and they're okay with that because they have a good sense of industry. In opposition to all of that, here's a cartoon where it says, Nelson, I'll see you after class. So you can imagine that this child in this situation would obviously have not developed a sense of industry. They're not going with the flow of things in class. They don't feel supported probably, or maybe they just don't have a sense of initiative because they don't have a good sense of autonomy, and maybe they don't trust the environment around them to support them, so they don't really want to listen anyway, and they are kind of seemingly outside of industry where they're constantly getting in trouble in school. Maybe they look different from the other students, so they don't feel like they blend in well. Maybe they are very impoverished, which is another thing, and also a reason why a resource-based economy is a good thing, because if you take this stage of development and think about poverty and think about how someone may or may not feel a sense of industry if they don't have sufficient clothing and shoes to wear to school, or if they're coming from a parental household where there's abuse going on. You know, it's hard sometimes to have a sense of industry when you're not having all your needs met. This is kind of where Maslow's hierarchy of needs comes in too, but it's hard. And these are the students who, you know, they feel guilty about the grades they make. They might even lie and be willing to kind of like try to mess up their paper to make it look otherwise. Or they might not be understanding what's being taught in class, so it's just like they're really frustrated and they don't feel a good sense of industry because they feel like I can't keep up, everyone else seems to be learning except for me. And it just it takes the caregivers to be supportive of the child in these kind of situations. This is all about parenting also, because in these stages of development, what can change a stage is simply one's perception of it, and parents help children, or caregivers help children create the perceptions. If they are poor, they can help the child develop a sense of initiative and autonomy to where they aren't ashamed of that. Or if the child is having trouble keeping up with the rest of the class, they can get help from the school or help the child and say, hey, you know, it's okay, no one's smarter than anyone else. If you're not getting it, we can get you a tutor, or you can maybe be a part of an IEP team so that you can have extra help at school. There's a number of ways, but if this is not, the caregivers that are helping to develop this human are not careful and paying attention to these types of things, the child can develop an attitude of, why do I even bother? And that's very important. And it doesn't take, you don't have to be a Mary Poppins mother or a Dr. Huxtable father. That might not be the best example, but you don't have to be this miracle parent. You just have to, you know, it doesn't have to be very hard. You can just pay attention to how your child's doing at school, and just talking with them can make all the difference. Just saying, you know, how's algebra going? Oh, I hate it. I can't figure it out. I'm not getting it. I'm not. And if the parent just says, well, hey, you'll get it eventually. You know, you have your whole life to be in this grade. You know, if you had to, you can always do the grade over. I'd support you in doing that. Or you have, you know, you have your whole life to figure this thing out. It's not the end of the world. What can I do to help you? Do you feel supported? Like, people think these are cornball questions, but you have to remember, like, no one's going to pay more attention to your child than you are. In some instances, some people will pay more attention to your children than you do. Sometimes if they have an ulterior motive, or just maybe if your child has a good connection with someone else. But be mindful of that too, because sometimes other people get involved in your children's lives and it's not for the right intention. It might be to spite you, to be competitive with you somehow, or just any number of reasons. So just make sure when you do allow your child to be getting more of the support they need from outside, just make sure that everyone's on the same page, that everyone has the same intention. But it's so important for parents just to tap in and say, hey, you know, how are things going, and help them understand that you are fitting in with the grand scheme of things. And if you don't, that's okay too. You're still gonna have a good life. You're still gonna be a part of this good industry called life. You can still thrive and create. Maybe you haven't found your niche yet, but it's okay. The last picture I just want to point out is like, or the second to last, is this little boy here. He kind of looks kind of scared. Maybe he's bigger than the other kids or looks different than the others. He's obviously a little chubby or what have you. It's important that his caregivers let him know that it's okay for everyone to be different. These types of comments to kids is so important, because for children, their subconscious is their parent. And as they grow up, they start taking on the things that you're telling them and playing those old scenarios back. And the last one is this emoji, gift emoji here. It says, can you be shorter than me? And so that's ultimately a sense of inferiority. if someone, if people who feel inferior have a need to make others feel inferior as well, because they're so frustrated, they don't feel like they fit in, they don't have a good sense of industry, they don't have a good sense of initiative, they don't have a good sense of autonomy, and they may not have developed trust. So for them, they need people to bow to them. They need people to feel inferior to them. And so you don't want to help your child develop these alternate kind of feelings, because they're just not healthy. You want your child to be able to develop in a manner that speaks for their overall optimal health and wellness. So in stage 5, the adolescent stage, the crisis is identity versus identity confusion. And I'm going to use 2 videos from Fresh Prince of Bel-Air to give an example of this. But overall, let's just backtrack briefly. This is the most important stage, because this is kind of like what sets the tone for the rest of the humans' standards and the way they approach life overall. So if a child has had a good sense of industry and hasn't been feeling inferior and is able to take the initiative, has a good sense of autonomy, then when they get to the identity versus identity confusion stage, they will have a sense of who they are. Now, don't get me wrong, because it takes a lifetime to really know thyself. But when a person has a good sense of identity, they kind of have a good visual on the kind of person that they are and understand what they will and will not do. And when a person understands what they will and will not do, they're able to have the confidence and the autonomy and the courage and the self-reliance and the initiative to stand up to others and say, hey, no, this is who I am. And so at this stage of adolescence, I would say from about the age of maybe 11 to early adulthood, if a person, yes, I would say about 11 to early adulthood, so like maybe from the age of 11 to like maybe 19, or maybe 11 to about 25, something like that. If you have a good sense of who you are and are able to take the initiative, then you're less likely to be peer pressured. You won't have a sense of inferiority, and when you don't have a high sense of inferiority, you're okay with being with not with whom, but when you don't have a high sense of inferiority, you're okay being who you are. If you do have a high sense of inferiority, then you kind of don't want to be who you are anyway, so you have these role reversals where you're not being yourself. So let me give an example of that and kind of show how this looks. In this first video that I'm going to show you, you'll see Carlton, which on the show Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Carlton, played by, I forget the actor's name, but Will Smith is the older cousin, and Carlton is mainly like a square throughout the whole show. Everyone knows he's a square, he's a nerd, he's just everything but a gangster. But in this particular episode, he was trying to be cool, trying to be something he's not. And so let's see how this plays out for him real quick, briefly. Quality's a little older, but the reason why I like to use this as an example is because it's so telling of how when someone has a high sense of inferiority, they are not being their self. See, everyone at our highest self is a total being of love. So in this episode, it just shows that outside the self, when someone's not being their self, they usually are surrounded by people who really don't have their interests at heart. If you noticed, these guys that he was putting on for were not really his friends. They just were trying to get him for information. One guy just was like, I need my taxes done. Like, what's up? I just need, everybody just kind of wants something. These aren't real friends, and when someone's not being their self, they will find that they are surrounded by a plethora of fake friends or people who just only want you for what benefits you bring into their life. So in the development stage, of adolescence is one of the most important and telling stages because it requires that one have a good sense of industry already, a good sense of initiative and the confidence and a good sense of trust and autonomy so that they can use all that and say, hey, that's not who I am, and kind of be more of the person in the next video I'm going to show you. So take a look at this next. So we'll stop it there, but the point of this is that Carlton was perfectly confident in being who he was. He wasn't embarrassed to dance the way he wanted to dance. He had a phenomenal sense of identity. He knows who he was. He knows that he likes bare manilow. He knows he talks different. And the people who love and care about him, as in real life, the people who love and care about you won't mind if you can be yourself. And so this stage is extremely important, because in voyaging to the highest self, one has to be able to be who they are. One has to be able to be their total and true self, regardless of how that is. Now, that's not to say that if you're sometimes a negative person and you're grouchy in the morning, that you need to make sure that you show everyone that you're grouchy in the morning sometime, because that's really who you are. That's not exactly what we're saying here, because ultimately everyone is trying to get to the best version of themselves. What we're saying is having the ability to understand that who you are is not expendable, that you have certain beliefs and certain ways of thinking that you should not modify when you have a healthy sense, and that you will not modify when you have a healthy sense of identity. Otherwise, you will have lots of identity confusion, and you will find yourself being in roles that are foreign to who you actually are more often. Everyone will have a time in their life where they fall into roles that they feel they not really are, but a person that doesn't have a good sense of the identity will have this type of role confusion more often, and they won't be able to truly navigate the world in accord with what their true desires are. Because if you're not being yourself and you're easily influenced, then you don't really know what you like. You don't really know what kind of food you like. You don't really have a good sense of what you want to do, what you want to have. These are the kind of people who grow to be very envious of others because they don't have a good sense of who they are. And when you don't have a good sense of who you are, you're not really industrious. You don't have a good good self-reliance or initiative about you. You kind of would be the kind of person that is only able to like steal ideas from others, or be just very critical of others who are doing things that you hadn't thought of. You will have a lot of shame and doubt in yourself, and that is what allows a person to be in these alternative roles, because they have a lot of shame and doubt in who they are. They don't have a good sense of autonomy. They don't understand that it's okay for them to make mistakes, but that they're still learning. They feel that their mistakes mean that they are incapable. Their mistakes make them feel guilty, and that they're inferior ultimately overall. So when you believe that you're inferior, you're more likely to shift around in your belief system. You're more likely to fall out of integrity when you don't have a good confidence about the self. This stage sets the forefront for later in life in so many directions and so many roles, because when it comes to intimacy, which is a very important stage as well, we'll talk about that soon. How are you going to be intimate with somebody when you are having identity confusion? So these will be the kind of people who they kind of feel inferior, or they have a sense of, don't have a good sense of initiative. These are the people who aren't going to want to have long conversations about who they are with you. These are the people who will probably tell you mainly nothing about them, because they don't want to get too intimate, because they don't know who they are, and they don't want to identify too closely, because then you might open them up to the vulnerable person that they truly are inside, where they don't believe that they are good enough. They feel inferior, so they don't want to show who they actually are because they don't believe that they're good enough. They feel an overall sense of guilt and regret about things. They can be very timid. They have a lot of shame about themselves, and they're not very trusting. They're terrified that they won't get back from the world when they reach out to the world, so they have no reason to kind of relate to you. In extreme cases, this is the kind of person that might become a narcissist or a sociopath, or much worse, even maybe like a serial killer or something, because it's just a lack of being able to identify with self, and that lack of inability to identify with self is often from a high sense of inferiority to others. In stage 6, this is the young adulthood stage, and the crisis of stage 6 of human development is to develop intimacy or isolation. So stage 6 is the young adulthood stage. The crisis is intimacy versus isolation. So one is able to develop close relationships, able to share the self with confidence, or one lacks the confidence to share their self with others. They're more isolated with their emotions. They're unable to connect emotionally to another, and they also lack empathy. And so they are more likely to isolate the self. Keep in mind that for all these stages, some humans develop them optimally, some develop some and not others, and it doesn't have to mean that a person is completely ruined if they haven't conquered a complete stage, and it never also ever means that it's too late either. So we're going to jump into that. Thereafter, let's go into stage 7, which is adulthood, and the crisis of stage 7 is generativity versus stagnation and selfishness. Full adulthood is what we're talking about here. So they are either creating something better for the next generation. That's what this sense of generativity is about. If they've done things right, then they have the ability to witness their children navigate life as an adult, because they are generative. They feel they've done things in a manner to make it better for others later on that are coming behind them. Or they realize that life has simply passed them by while they've been doing the same old thing they've been doing their whole entire life. It's kind of like a person who wakes up one day and be like, oh my God, I'm 50, or oh my God, I'm 40, oh my God, I'm 70, and I don't, that kind of moment of epiphany, where they realize life has passed and one was focused on more of the self or own self-interest rather than the interest or the greatest interest of their children. And it'll be reflective in children, because these will be children who are unable to thrive and children who are unable to move into adulthood in a healthy way. So it's either they have been generative, or they now see themselves as having a sense of stagnation and kind of felt that they've kind of been selfish, like, oh my God, I just been doing this all these years and I didn't think about this. That's kind of stage 7. So generativity or stagnation. And then lastly is the overall old age stage. And at this stage, the crisis is either a sense of integrity or a sense of despair for what their life has been. One looks back on their life and they have an overall sense that they did the right thing in life, or they have a sense of despair and regret. Did they develop adults, or did they develop dependents? So if the person had children, they are now able to look back and say, okay, did I show these humans how to be a successful adult, or did I simply keep them marginalized and kind of oppressed, and now I've just raised dependents, and now am I in a stage where does the person see themselves as just when they die, the children they created are just kind of like unable to function. So at this age, that's when these kind of thoughts come on, and sometimes this age can be backed up a little bit. If someone has adult children already, they can kind of reflect and say, okay, did I raise a dependent, or did I raise someone who's going to thrive and develop their self in life? Or did I raise someone that I'm going to have to make sure that I govern forever? And again, none of this is for judgment. None of this is for comparing to others. This is just all about trying to be the best version of ourselves. There is no real perfection. It's just what everyone can strive to be. So then lastly, did they establish meaningful relationships, or did they go through life with too many superficial relationships? Because if someone has navigated life that wasn't able to kind of really develop their own sense of identity and has identity role confusion, then they more than likely had a lot of superficial relationships that weren't really of substance in any way. So overall, humans who develop the most optimally have a secure attachment. A secure attachment is required for optimal development. And so what does a secure attachment looks like? It's like all those things we talked about before. When someone is going through all these stages, did they have a caregiver to guide them along the way and say, hey, it's okay, you can take the initiative. Hey, it's okay if you spilled the milk. You can, everyone makes mistakes. Hey, it's okay, you can do whatever you want. Hey, it's okay, I'm not angry at you. Everybody makes mistakes. Did you have a caregiver in your life that says, you can do anything, chase your dreams and make them come true? This is where all of that reaches fruition, through having a secure attachment to someone who constantly and consistently guided this person. So for instance, I have a friend whose daughter had even recently attempted suicide, and she was just really hurt behind it, but she was just so confident in the way that she had guided her child that she saw it just as a minor setback and a minor downtime. Even though it was something as serious as suicide, she recognized that, what, this was an eye-opener. And it turned out that her daughter was having some issues with a dating issue, and she just took it really, really hard. And they had some problems before. The daughter had moved out of the home in high school, wanting to stay near a boyfriend, and just overall, it was just a really challenging time. But throughout that time, the parent, even when the child had left home for the short time, the parent remained in conversation to be very encouraging with this child. The parent remained as a go-to and a guide, and they have more confidence that they didn't raise a dependent, because they can see that the child still has a zeal to thrive. The child came back home to my friend not long ago, just about 2 years ago. The friend had the daughter come back home, and their relationship, that they have been working on it or what have you, but overall, the secure attachment was there from the beginning. Did they hold the child enough in infancy? Did they respond to the child's cries? Did they make sure the child developed small little things like learning how to walk, and encouraging them to do their best and let the child know that they can achieve anything? Did they help the child take initiative? Did they help the child feel okay about school whenever they had challenges? Did they help the child develop a good sense of identity? And my friend speaks very highly of this because she mentioned a time where she was kind of upset with a family member because the daughter told her that she had went to a family member where drugs were being done and alcohol was being passed around, and it was offered to her, and she said the daughter just told her that she didn't even think about it, that it's just not who she is. She's not going to be a person who uses any drugs, even if it's considered just weed, quote unquote, or if it's just a sip, she just has zero interest. So all of those things led up to her having a good sense of identity overall. So humans need to feel secure and have all of their needs met in order to feel securely attached. So a need doesn't have to be, oh, they have the most expensive outfit every single day that they're wearing. No, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about these emotional needs that go along with encouraging and showing and understanding that people make mistakes, you know, be more of a guide. Some parents take on the role and thinking that being a parent just means that they boss around someone else, and that's not the case. Being a parent is all about being a guide and having those small conversations. They matter so much. Just if you pick your child up from school in the car and just say, hey, how was your day? And, you know, get some real answers, 5 or 10 minutes, you know, and make sure you put that encouragement in there when you see that they're down. You make sure you tell them that they're beautiful. Make sure you let them know what standards you see in them and what good characteristics they have. That's so important. Each stage presents a crisis, like we mentioned, and resolution of each crisis is a perception. Okay? Resolution of each crisis is a perception. All right, so human thoughts establish how one perceives a problem as well as how one perceives the solution. So it's all in the perception. It's so important that caregivers encourage certain perceptions, because at the all and end all, that's all that it actually boils down to. Okay, humans can use their thoughts and perceptions to re-navigate a developmental stage through meditation, through self-reflection, and also through cognitive behavioral. You acknowledge that, but you can go back and rethink the way you perceive that event if you need to, and only you know what those things are. So again, here's Erikson's stages of development: infancy, early childhood, preschool, school age, adolescence, young adult, middle adulthood, maturity, where you have, like we mentioned, ego identity versus despair. I called it something a little different, but this list is a very good to go by. And I just want to close with this example from a film called The Art of War. What I've talked about in this last slide, I mentioned how one can use therapy or meditation or just even self-reflection to go back and rewire the self. You can change your behavior. You can go back and change your behavior. So here's an example of modifying behavior. Now, when this comes to yourself, consider it as a war of you fighting to be the best version of yourself. And you can modify your behavior. You sometimes just have to cut ties with people, cut your own head off, in the sense, like, if you know you think a certain way about things, you got to just cut all that out. And you can change. It can be done. Sometimes it can be extreme events that lead you to changing your behavior or whatever it takes to get to the best version of yourself. But ultimately, this is how humans developed and will continue to develop. If you are concerned with your behavior or your development, or you are having trouble getting to the best version of yourself, go back and pay attention to these stages. If you know that you are very mistrusting, go back and work on your infant self. Okay, that's the end. Thank you for watching. This concludes part 2 of human development. Any questions, Kimberly?